of meeting them, actually in Glen Rock not too long ago, and so I want to welcome them up here and ask them to share their stories with you.
Hi, I'm excuse me, Kathy Boomhauer, and I'm here to share something that 8 years ago I would have been absolutely mortified to stand up here and tell you, but I am the mother of a heroin addict. Thankfully, he is a heroin addict in recovery, and I consider myself very blessed because I'm lucky enough to have him here in this room today. We have met so many people who don't know where their children are, or even more devastating, have had to bury their sons and daughters. It's just heartbreaking. They say that addiction is a family disease. There's a quote that I had read that said, addiction is not a spectator sport. Eventually the whole family gets to play. And my family got to play. I lost my father to addiction. Last year I lost my oldest brother to addiction. And I have several family members that are struggling with the battle right now. But when addiction came after our son, Kyle, our beautiful oldest child, our whole lives changed. He had a typical suburban life he grew up in Paramus. He had a lot of friends, he did well in school, played sports. But we noticed as high school progressed, and we kept what we thought was a great eye on him and talked, and we had a great relationship. But we noticed as we got towards the end of high school that Kyle had changed. And our compassionate, intelligent, athletic son, he just became disengaged from life, lost interest in his family, so many changes. He was lying, he was stealing, he was skipping school. I'll let him tell his story, but he gave up college scholarships, all for an addiction that had spun out of control. Our lives had become completely unmanageable. But yet through it all, I kept trying to fix everything, because that's what we parents and enablers, that's what we do. And first of all, I didn't want anybody to know, but I just wanted him to go to school and have a normal life and graduate. And we all just got sucked right in on his journey with him. I became a great detective. I could check his Easy Pass, I checked his phone. The day I searched his car, I found his first arrest record, which was devastating as a parent. And then later came to find, by picking up the mail one day, that my poor younger son had missed a letter from attorney about a second arrest. We've learned that addicts are the master manipulators, and they know exactly how to work the family and how to tell everybody what they want to hear and get us all discombobulated so we're not talking to each other. And that's exactly what happened, and the effect on the family is awful. So we knew that Kyle had to go to rehab, or we also knew without uncertainty that he was going to die. But we've learned that they have to want their recovery. They have to want to go to rehab. As a parent, every night before I went to bed, I would check his room and make sure he was breathing. And every morning when I woke up, I would pray when I opened the door that he was breathing. And no parent should ever have to deal with this. So when Kyle finally came to us and said he needed help, my husband and I had already done our research. We found a facility in Pennsylvania that specialized in working with young adult males. Kyle was 19 going on 20. We didn't feel he should be in a rehab facility with people our age. We wanted him with his peers. And the day that we dropped Kyle off at rehab was the most peaceful day in our household in quite a long time. We knew that he would be safe for 30 days if he didn't check himself out, because they can. But 30 days, it's a Band-Aid. You know, initially we said, oh, this is great, 30 days he's gonna be all fixed. No, it's a lifelong problem. And while we were there, we were fortunate enough to attend a 5-day family education program. It was the most intense, emotional program I've ever been to in my life. I don't think I've ever cried that much in my life, but it was absolutely necessary as a family to go through that process and to be educated exactly what our family had been through. Once Kyle finished the 30-day program, my husband and I decided as a family that we were not going to allow Kyle to come home. That was a really difficult decision. He had never lived on his own, but we realized the chaos that our family had been involved in and knew that We just needed more time to heal, especially his brother Kevin, who was an unwilling part of all of this. So we told Kyle he couldn't come home. He had a lot of relapses. I'll let him go into that. But we were thankful that he found his way through it all. Through it all, we never gave up hope. You can't give up hope. And he knew, I want to believe that he knew that we loved him, no matter how much he probably hated us at the time. He knew how much we loved him. As a parent, what I've learned is we have to take care of ourselves. You got to go out and take that walk. We find, like they say, is just like with the oxygen mask on the plane. You have to take care of yourself before you can take care of them. Kyle had his arms wrapped around the heroin needle, and we had our arms wrapped around him. And poor Kevin, our younger son, just kind of got lost in the shuffle. I think that was the most heartbreaking thing. As heartbreaking as it was when Kyle was in rehab, to hear his whole story and wonder where I had been when he was doing all of this. It was more devastating to see Kevin speak and hear the impact of Kyle's addiction on him and truly understand how much it impacts the family. So besides taking care of yourself, parents, family members have to get educated. I can't stress that enough. There's meetings like this. There's so many groups out there. There's Al-Anon, there's Nar-Anon. There's a wonderful parent support group in Ridgewood that meets every Tuesday night. It's so important, and it's the only place where you can go and people get you. We, as good as our family was, we decided to share the truth with our family and our friends, the people that needed to know. They were wonderful. We had no idea how they would react, but they realized it was a disease, and they realized that Kyle needed help, and they couldn't have been any more supportive. But they don't get it. They try, but the people in the rooms that have children or people in their family going through this, they get it. Sometimes we think we're crazy. It's nice to be with a bunch of crazy people who understand you. It really is. And the last thing is to talk about it. My husband Gary and I decided that we were going to tell people. There's no shame in this. I wish 8 years ago things had been a little more open. There was no meetings like this about heroin. When Kyle got arrested, I was petrified to go to work the next day going, oh my gosh, who reads the police blotter in Elmwood Park because they're going to know my son was arrested. But I have found through the years that the more I talk about it, there's not one person that I've talked to that doesn't know someone, have someone in their family, tell me they need to speak to me. And that helps. It just helps to know that you're not in this alone. So we consider ourselves today truly, truly blessed to still have Kyle here with us today. It's a miracle. We are so proud of the young man that he's become. We've learned that we had to let him fall and not cushion the fall in order for him to learn how to fly. And today, my son is soaring. He really is. We are so proud of him. I'd like to introduce my son, Kyle.
Kyle Boomhauer. I'm a recovering heroin addict, and it's a privilege and an honor to be here tonight because events like this are so important, and they're so important for two main reasons, right? And the first one is that there's still such a stigma and a misconception about what addiction really is and what it looks like. When I was growing up, through middle school and high school, if you would ask me to picture a drug addict, it would have been a bum under a bridge or on Skid Row, in like a trench coat with no teeth, looked like they were dying, just that stereotypical image of what you think a drug addict is. But that couldn't be further from the truth, right? I know I've had, the opportunity to meet a lot of recovering drug addicts, and I know people as young as 12 years old who got addicted to heroin and people as old as 75. I know doctors, lawyers, teachers, students, police officers, just about every domain of life this can touch. Nobody's exempt from addiction. And that's what was so surprising to me because I grew up in Paramus, I grew up with a good suburban upbringing, and I had no real trauma in my life. I had two parents who loved me and provided for me. I was always a roof over my head. There was always food on the table. And I did really well in school, and I did really well in sports, and I had a big group of friends. And I couldn't imagine somebody like me becoming a drug addict. That just, I couldn't fathom that. So it's important to recognize that, like it's been said time and time again tonight, that nobody is exempt from this, that anybody, it can touch anybody's life. And the second reason that this is so important is because like I just said, it can touch anybody's life, right? And the only way that you're going to be able to help is if you have an understanding of what addiction is and what it looks like and the way that it affects people. It's the only way that you're going to be able to help when it does touch your life. And so I think I can be of best service tonight in explaining the psychology, the mentality, just the reality of what it's like to be addicted to drugs like heroin, right? And I started drinking and getting high when I was 14 years old. And it wasn't, it was at a normal, it was just like a party, like a middle school party that we were at, and somebody was passing around alcohol, and I was curious. And I had been through probably like 5 or 6 years of drug and alcohol prevention, education and training at this point. We were introduced to the DARE program in 5th grade, and you hear all about like, if you try cocaine, you're gonna die, and all of these crazy things. And so at this point, I knew full well that it was a risk. But that being said, I suffered from this idea that it's never gonna be me. This could never be me. And so I drank, and I started getting high. And alcohol and drugs had a different effect on me than they have on normal people, right? Because growing up, despite being this normal kid and succeeding in school and thriving in sports and having this big group of friends, it just felt like there was always this hole inside of me, right? That there was something inherently wrong with me, like I just didn't fit in anywhere. And so I would gravitate towards anything that made me feel good to just get out of my own head for like 5 minutes. And so initially, when you're growing up, it's things like, you'll throw yourself into school, or you'll throw yourself into sports, or relationships, or music, or whatever it is. But when I took that first drink, and when I got high for the first time, it was like a revelatory experience for me. Because for the first time, I could breathe a sigh of relief and be comfortable in my own skin. And so, because I had these feelings, that I had growing up, and because I had found what seemed to me the greatest solution I had ever discovered in my life, I was going to pursue it as much as I could. And most people that fall into addiction follow a general progression, right? Where I started out with alcohol and it progressed to marijuana, to hallucinogens, to ecstasy, to cocaine, and ultimately, when I was 18 years old, I was introduced to opioid painkillers, right? And I was hanging out with a bunch of friends, and somebody passed it my way, and at this point I figured, why not give it a shot? And that changed my life, drastically, for the worse. Because that opioid painkiller did something for me. It gave me this feeling that I never thought that I would ever be able to experience. Just this complete sense of ease and comfort that everything in the world was going to be okay. Right? But the problem with opioid painkillers, and it was said before, is that they're incredibly expensive. And anybody who uses drugs long enough starts to develop a tolerance, right? So initially, 5 milligrams would be enough to get me high. And then it was 10, and then it was 20, and then it was 50. And by the end of this, it took 200 to 300 milligrams to get high at a single time. And I needed to do this anywhere between 2 and 4 times a day. So at $1 a milligram, that's almost $1,000 a day habit. And no reasonable 19 or 20-year-old kid can afford that. That's just impossible. So when you find out that you can get a $4 bag of heroin, which is the equivalent to one of those $30 pills, there's absolutely no reason to not do it. So I started to go into Patterson, and I started doing heroin, and my life took a very, very quick downward spiral. Because heroin is unlike, I don't want to negate all of the other, addictions, like, alcohol addiction or addiction to cocaine or any other substance for that matter. But heroin addiction for me was another animal, right? And what happens is you become willing to do just about anything in the world to get one more. So I would lie, and I would cheat, and I would steal, and I would con, and I would hustle. I would do whatever it took. I broke into my drug dealer's house to steal all of his heroin. Like, there were no limits. There were no lines that I wouldn't cross when I needed more. And unfortunately, the victims, more often than not, were my family and my friends. Because the truth was, it was easy to manipulate. And it wasn't that I didn't love my family and my friends, because I desperately, desperately loved them. But when I needed more, nothing else in the world matters. It's like you have blinders on. And the only thing that you can think about, it's all consuming, is how am I getting my next one? And there's two reasons that it's that intense, that it's that severe, right? And one is because of the physical withdrawals. You know, if anybody's had experience with the flu, what physical withdrawals from heroin feel like is like the flu times 10. Right? It feels like it feels like somebody like took your skin off. Like every bone in your body is it just aches. You're throwing up, uncontrollable diarrhea. It's not pleasant and it's so painful. And all it takes is just one more bag to not feel like that again. So when you're in that physical, like when you're experiencing this physical trauma and all you want to do is die, if all I have to do is get another bag, I'm going to do whatever it's going to take to get that next bag, right? And the second reason was because I had become so psychologically and so emotionally dependent upon this substance. I could not imagine living life without it because it had become my coping skill, my solution for everything in life, right? I didn't know how to get through life without some sort of narcotic in my system. And none of the other narcotics that I had used previously were working anymore. Heroin was the only thing. You know, and when I wasn't using it, all of the guilt and the shame and the remorse and the self-loathing that I experienced from all of the things that I had done to get heroin made me need more, you know? So, because you start to cross all these ethical boundaries, you start to experience consequences. And I'll speed through this. By the time that I was 20 years old, I had 2 brief experiences with incarceration. I failed out of 2 state colleges in New Jersey, one of them twice, both of which I had full academic scholarships too. I got kicked out of an honors college in one of those schools. I bounced in and out of, I'm not even sure how many rehabs, halfway houses, transitional living facilities, all sorts of programs, many of which I was kicked out of just because I couldn't stay sober. I couldn't live without heroin. I destroyed every meaningful relationship I had in my life. You know, my parents on multiple occasions asked me to not come back home. I fell out and almost died on my best friend's couch. I had nothing left. And I was still convinced that I didn't have a problem. Not even so much that I didn't have a problem, I couldn't live without it. I couldn't. And I figured if I'm going to die by this, then that's what it's going to take. I would rather die than live without this. And, but I was blessed. Right? And I recognize that I'm blessed because unfortunately there were tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people just within the last couple of years who haven't had this opportunity. But I finally had a moment where I was willing to do anything in the world to stop. And it wasn't any of those external consequences. Because the first thing that I did every time I got out of jail, every time I got kicked out of my house, every time I got kicked out of school, my first response was to get high. Because that was my coping mechanism. That's what I needed to do to get through these situations, even though it was the thing that caused these situations. But, so none of those external consequences ever had any lasting impact on me. But I finally had a day where I woke up and I had never wanted to die more. And it was a feeling I wasn't totally unfamiliar with because the last year of my heroin addiction, I put my head on the pillow every single night and didn't care if I woke up the next morning. But this day, I begged to God, I didn't even know if I believed it was just take me or save me because I couldn't live like that. You know? And I was blessed because I was parked off the side of a highway and I was hoping what would happen was God would just send a tractor trailer to take me out. Because I couldn't bring myself to kill myself, so I figured, like, God, maybe throw me this bone and do me this one favor this one time, you know? But instead, I got a text message from my father, and at this point, my parents probably had an idea that I was using again, but weren't entirely sure. And it said something along the lines of Kyle, I know things are really difficult for you right now, and are really difficult with the family, but we want you to know that we're proud of you and everything that you're trying to do. And I broke down. And that was my moment. Because the psychology of a drug addict is bizarre. Like I don't think I could ever explain it to a non-drug addict. But there's this constant lie that most of us tell ourselves, right? And the lie is that when I get high, the only person I hurt is me. And when I tell myself that, I can then justify doing all of the things that I'm doing. But in that moment, I saw right through it. And I saw that when I get high, I destroy everything and everyone around me. And first time in 6 years, I didn't want to live like that anymore. So I picked up the phone and I reached out for help. Right? And that was 6.5 years ago. You know, it's such a blessing. Such a blessing to be where I am today, because I recognize that unfortunately not everybody has this opportunity. But that being said, the message that I try to bring in any place that I try to speak is not to give up hope. Because even though, if you look at the numbers, the recovery rate for heroin addicts is extraordinarily low, that doesn't mean it's impossible. And I've met hundreds, if not thousands, of recovering heroin addicts over the last 6.5 years. You know? It's possible, but you gotta want it. And I was blessed because I had the support of my family. Even though they kept me at, at a little more than an arm's length for their own sanity, I knew that they still loved me and that if and when I needed help, that they would be there. You know, and I had the support of a small group of the friends that I had growing up. And because of this love and support, I found the strength to do everything that I needed to do to stay clean a day at a time. Right, and it was without a doubt the single hardest thing that I've had to do in my life, because you live for so long and your entire world revolves around this one little drug, right? And like you can't imagine living without it, and to have to change everything, the places I go, the people I hang out with, the things that I do, the way that I behave, was challenging, but it's not impossible. And so that's part of what what I'm here to say. Is that if there's somebody in your life, and it could be friend, family member, somebody like you know about through somebody, whatever, there's ways that people can get help, right? So speak to your police officers, or speak to your medical professionals, or speak to people that work in recovery facilities. Because the truth is that just like the fact that addiction, nobody's exempt from addiction, no drug addict is exempt from recovery. So this is possible for any single one of them, but you just gotta want it. So again, I'm really grateful to be here tonight for this opportunity to speak, and thank you.